Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our DevSecOps for the public sector webinar in partnership with CloudBees and Sonatype. My name is Ken Monty, and I'm the lead solution architect at Fierce Software. A few housekeeping notes. You have all been muted upon entry. Just kind of keep things nice and orderly. There will be a moment at the end for questions and answers. If we don't get to them all, we'll be able to contact you and follow up afterwards. But otherwise, this will be recorded and provided to you after this presentation in case you'd like to distribute it to your other teammates who might have missed this event. Moving into it, Fierce Software is a small, woman-owned, value-added reseller. Our strengths are in enterprise open source solutions, primarily in secure platforms, DevOps, and data analytics. Most of our customers are in the public sector. We deal directly with federal system integrators, so the prime contractors that make the plane, trains, and automobiles. We work with them to put a lot of these logos together, do some really cool things. We enable our customers with some of our value adds, such as complimentary training, webinars, and workshops. We can deploy virtually, on site, coast to coast in a single week. We drop in with a lab, can work across automation, containers, DevOps, security, and data science, just to name a few topics. We've done lunch and learns to certified 4-day team training campaigns. So holler at us if you'd like to explore your own training and workshop options. We've got our little social bits down there. We'll provide our contact information at the end as well. Today, we'll be focused on all things related to DevOps and security. As we start to jump into our conversation, it's hard to talk DevOps without including one of the pioneers in the DevOps platforms, CloudBees. So this time I'd like to introduce my cohort and partner in crime for this event, the other half of the Ben and Ken show, Ben Chikoski, public sector team lead at CloudBees. He's going to introduce himself, CloudBees, and how they're a leader, pioneer, and the experts in this space.
So CloudBees, we're a company that's been around for about 10 years, and we came about because our CTO created Jenkins, originally called Hudson, and it's a CI/CD orchestration tool that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of and used. It's pretty much the standard for CI/CD worldwide. But we recognize that whereas Jenkins is good for small scale, single teams, that kind of thing, it doesn't scale up very well, and there's this gaping need for an enterprise-grade version, and so that's what we created. Fortunately, we've built up a good head of steam. We're growing like gangbusters, and right now we're topping about 500 employees. Yeah, so here's just a couple data points to show the extent of Jenkins usage across the world. And yeah, we're very proud to continue to be extremely involved in the Jenkins project. I think it's something like 80% of the code that goes into open source Jenkins comes from a CloudBees employee. So here's just a little snapshot of some of our key customers in the federal space, and we've built very productive partnerships with the major cloud providers and some big technology names that you all have heard of. And here's a bunch of logos of some customers on the commercial side that have trusted us to help them, scale with their DevOps, their application modernization, CI/CD, that sort of thing. All right, so who cares about us? Essentially, anywhere where software development and delivery is happening at scale, that's right for us. As I said before, Jenkins, good, small scale, good. Well-defined kind of onesies, twosies teams, that's excellent. We love Jenkins. But it's got its limitations, as any open source project would. So where things are happening at scale, that's a good use case for CloudBees. Wherever you're seeing transformation and DevOps and agile development and CI/CD, where applications need to be built and released and delivered faster and modernized from legacy. Those are all prime use cases for us. But fortunately, the federal government has stated its government-wide IT priorities recently, and 3 out of the 5 that they stated are squarely in our wheelhouse. We can't do it alone, though. This is my call for partnerships. So this is an opportunity for us to team up. If anybody in the audience here is working for an integrator, has government customers of your own, then this means we got an opportunity to share with those customers the art of the possible. Let them know what they could be doing. I'm sure your customers are using a lot of Jenkins right now. If they're having some trouble with it, or they're trying to scale up, then we want to reveal what can be done with them, and then you can be there to perform the services and long-term engagements around that. So that's my call for partnerships. Yeah, so here's a couple of reasons. All right, why do these people care? There are a couple of anti-patterns that happen when somebody tries to scale up open source Jenkins. The one on the left there, the scary looking monster, we call it Jenkins monolith, where basically all teams share like a single centralized Jenkins server that just gets totally overloaded. It's got limited scalability, and it's hard to administer when you got teams with diverse needs. So that's the one thing that we help to avoid. The other is Jenkins sprawl, where you got this just proliferations of little baby Jenkins all over an enterprise with disconnected teams, disconnected servers. I mean, the teams are enjoying a great deal of autonomy, but and it does scale to an extent, but the kind of negative side effect is a lack of governance, lack of visibility. It's got like very heavy administrative costs, burdens around standardization and compliance and enforcing security controls. So that's the other big anti-pattern that we've come around to help solve. All right, so what do customers see out of that? Those great numbers right there. So the State of DevOps report most recently put these numbers together, and obviously they're really flattering. The results really boil down to 2 main things. One is better throughput, and the other is better developer productivity. This is just a pat on the back from a big customer and partner of ours right there. You can see that they're real numbers around types of gains and benefits that they're achieving by moving to CloudBees. All right, so how do we do it? We do it primarily with this main product called CloudBees Core, and I believe Ken will be mentioning this again in a little bit. This slide actually is now slightly out of date. If we move to the next slide, we will prove that it's out of date because we recently made an acquisition of a company called Electric Cloud. And so that brought into the family, into our product suite, a couple other really cool products. The one here listed is now called CloudBees Flow. It was Electric Flow. And this brings us into the application release orchestration realm. So further to the right into application release, delivery, management, closer to infrastructure and operations staff. And we like all y'all, so it's nice to be here. Yeah, and this kind of proves that other people like these tools too. And we've got the backing of Gartner and Forrester. We're happy about the analyst's perspective on us. Let me just quickly call your attention to the one on the right, the Forrester wave. That is not a misprint. That's not some weird rendering of this graphic. The dot literally is off the graph. I don't know what kind of calculus went into that, but they rated us literally off the chart. So that's all good. All right, so what's a fun, exciting kind of novel use case out there that has brought us to this webinar, DevSecOps? Somebody out there is getting paid $5 a pop every time DevSecOps is mentioned. We get our jollies out of bringing it from buzzword into reality. How do we actually do this? Fortunately, our foundational technology is familiar the world over, so it's just an extension of more traditional use cases, and it's incredibly straightforward. The basic idea is to just weave those security functions into that software delivery process, pushing security to the left through well-orchestrated pipelines. Simple. And it's got those nice results on the left and to the right there. So if you're having conversation with your government customers, those are big selling points in that box there, especially the one on the bottom there, because the ATO process is everyone's favorite whipping boy. Everybody feels some pain around that, and we're here to remove some of that pain. So bottom line is, how important is DevSecOps in the federal market? Extremely important. Compliance is king. We all know that. Essentially, security is to Fed what ROI is to the commercial space, and we're pretty much having DevSecOps come up in almost 100% of our conversations. Yeah, here's just one example of the spotlight. We're real excited about this one. DoD recently stood up this initiative they're calling DevSecOps Platform Initiative, and we are one of the core components, along with Sonatype, our partners on this webinar, and Red Hat, for that matter. But the idea here is they are building and continue to build out this central repo of specially hardened containers that are available for use across the DoD and other agencies as well. So we have built these specially containerized and hardened DoD grade version of CloudBees Core that is part of the thing that has been granted and will continue to earn continuous ATO from the DoD CIO level. Those are a lot of acronyms, but I think people on this webinar are probably steeped in alphabet soup if you're in the DC area, and the fundamental message is they're worthy of deployment across DoD, and if done through rigorous accreditation. Yeah, so I can't go a talk without offering up some free training. We love getting you spun up on our technology. We think it stands on its own 2 feet, and we want you to have a good experience with it. So the link at the top there is stuff that you can just do on your own time. Same with the link in the bottom if you're in the market for getting some formal certs, trying to use up some professional development budget. I know you all have. And then the one in the middle is a more recent thing that we're doing, but it's being really well received. So essentially, we come in. Let's say you're Deloitte or Northrop Grumman. We'll come in. You put people in seats, and we will come give you a workshop on building CloudBees pipelines. Everything from more basic Jenkins usage up to like real advanced administrator type stuff using CloudBees Core. So this is just a standing offer. Contact me, contact Ken. You can point you to me. We will give you a pipeline workshop for free if you put people in seats. And that's that. Yeah, we'll do it anytime. We'll come to you. Do it all around the country. So please take me up on it. All right, Ken. I think that's where I'll stop now and kick it back over to you, unless anybody has any questions.
Looking pretty good so far in chat. If we have anything come up, we'll follow it with questions at the end. Something that is pretty great. I'm a certified CloudBees Jenkins engineer myself, and I found the training to be pretty incredible, and the certification, like the whole learning process, afforded me the ability to kind of figure this out a lot faster and easier than I would have normally. And other than that, it kind of actually gave me a little bit more of a love for open source, because as you kind of figure this stuff out, you want to share it with everybody too. It improves your life so much, right? And it's super popular. Everyone's talking about it, right? It's all the rage, this DevOps thing. So let's think about that busy word DevOps. So as we start to think about DevOps, what comes to mind? We're definitely talking about the cloud. There's something about this containers stuff. I heard my CTO say something about the pipelines in our briefing the other day. And then you've got that synergy agile thing, right? Yeah, that's just scratching the surface, because as you look at DevOps solutions, you end up with this. Hundreds of logos. All sorts of DevOps-y, cloud native, containerized fun. Where do you start? You want to see CloudBees and all of this? Got CloudBees right here. Nice little zoom on that. Boom. Our logo isn't up there. Not yet. Give it a couple months. Anywho. That eye chart is basically the explosion of that big kahuna buzzword, digital transformation. All that is a natural progression of technology, but as commonplace mechanisms for every business, organization, or agency. Every company is a software company now, right? And that can set you apart by leagues. So I like to boil things down to the root cause. If you look at most of DevOps practices, tools, workflows, etc., you get a few key tenets. Your Git repo is going to be your best friend, and maybe even your favorite social network. It is mine. From infrastructure, deployment, scripts, documentation, applications, of course, and more. Rapid feedback to constantly learn and better process with in-depth monitoring is how you make your workflows more effective. Now we're using immutable systems and not SSHing into machines to fix because it's easier and faster to debug and redeploy, since our application is always releasable, powered by an automated pipeline. So DevOps is more than just ideologies, it's a way of life. In fact, there's a life cycle involved, and we have to develop to these new workflows to ensure that we're actually benefiting from this DevOps stuff. Without monitoring and feedback, we're not far from just deploying things with bash scripts, which doesn't scale either. Now, thankfully, DevOps isn't a niche thing. It's only the largest companies or corporations and most specialty shops run. It's about as popular as pumpkin spice lattes. Oh yeah, pumpkin spice lattes, guys. Yeah. All right, so now on top of tech, ideologies, and life cycle, there's a cultural component as well. DevOps allows you to address every character on your bench. Business, who's trying to drive the organization forward. Security, who's ensuring to keep the dragons at bay. Your developers are just magically turning ideas into capabilities. And your operators have to keep the lights on, often while the power is still flowing. So we got people problems. Different skill levels and silly caste systems keep things sluggish. My tools don't work with your tools or systems, or the ecosystems don't allow interoperability. And then you've got your bashers and Pythonistas who can automate their pretty faces off. But other teams, while having processes that would be able to benefit from automation, have neither the resources or capabilities to do so. And so things are left to more manual mechanisms. So let's touch on that, right? Because that's what everyone's thinking now. Like, I've been automating my bash scripts for years. That's great. But even if you automate your tiny machines, it does nothing to provide tangible automation to the organization. If we're being real, all you're doing is making your job easier, which is respectable, but extremely myopic. All right. Ooh, we're getting a little heated. Some hot and spicy takes. It's easy to do. You've got the classic war between these different hats, the family feud, if you will. I wear them all, so I'm often found fighting amongst myself. Now, what's funny about it is once the fighting settles down, once we stop hoo-haing, and we're cheersing at the bar, what we all say is we want the same core things, right? We want stability, we want security, we want the assurance that we're not going to be called at 3 a.m. when the system goes down. We want to not spend hours or days to weeks on root cause analysis, debugging, maintenance, procurement. Distill it down even more, we just want to go home at 5 knowing we did a good job without the risk of a fire as soon as we turn our backs. So in polling and canvassing the people for problems, we find some commonalities. Things take too long, don't have enough room to work in, lots of manual work at that too. Things are hard to manage, and checks and stamps to get along the way are hard to get. And no one really knows what's going on if we're being honest. Right? Alright, so let's call a spade and just say it. Relations between developers and operators, a classic Romeo and Juliet, is a dumpster fire. So this is what we're used to. Silos everywhere. Throwing things over the wall, hoping it gets to the other side all right and proper with no problems, right? So this is what actually happens. Is it's often not the case. You get the works on my machine problem. And then your poor operators have such a complex stack to administer, they don't have the time to understand the intricacies of every application deployed. It's not their job to. So we're going to boil the water out of this DevOps lake. If we're going to reduce it down even more, a lot of our pains go to issues with delivering applications, reliability, and management. So if you worked on American and import cars, you know the pain in having two different tool sets, metrics or SAE, Imperial. So the three pillars of DevSecOps is to standardize, optimize, and automate. So let's standardize our stack as much as we can. Standardization is one of the key components of increasing your overall security posture. You can't rest on your laurels. You got to set up a feedback system, positive and negative feedback. And we're not just automating because it makes things fast and easy. Humans suck, okay? We're very fallible. We make mistakes. I see things wrong. My vision's going bad. Automation helps keep that finicky human element to a minimum. Another thing we need is to modernize around containerized workflows, right? There's a running joke that the works in my box problem was solved because Docker came along and said, okay, well, let's ship your box then. And boom, we're shipping skinny VMs. But even that provides a lot of value, even as sort of a joke. Hey, well, I've heard of this containers and Docker thing. That's supposed to be the solution to all of our problems. Developers and our operators singing Kumbaya, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. No. But containers are an important part of our solution. So what is a container? It depends on who you ask. If you ask an operator, they'll probably look at it like a tiny VM, which is not wrong, but not entirely right as well. On the developer side of the house, it's a very nice and safe way to deploy their application in a format that can be then deployed and run anywhere with little worry over portability or compatibility. No more works on my box problem, right? On the infrastructure side, if you look at deployment and density options provided by containers compared to VMs, instead of recreating unique hardware, kernel address, spaces, resources, etc. for each machine, containers share a host kernel, can be bare metal or virtualized. Otherwise, isolation is provided closer to the application layer. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh no, it took nearly a decade for some agencies to get on board with virtualization at large. Now we have to get rid of it and learn something new. No, VMs aren't going anywhere. They're here to stay, but many workloads can find better benefits in the elasticity offered by containers. Containers aren't really a new thing, by the way. Modern containers just provide clean and user-friendly interfaces to system calls and kernel functions that date back decades. If you've ever set up many popular daemons in secure context, you're familiar with CH roots and other key file system and process isolation functions that allow containers to do what they do. What we did see, though, is an explosion in popularity. A few years ago, we saw a rapid acceleration in the container ecosystem made by these new user-friendly and open-source interfaces. So in short time, the open-source community has revolutionized how IT operates. Just as we now by default build for an accessible and responsive mobile-first web, we're seeing more container-first solutions in a very short amount of time. That eye chart of logos from earlier didn't exist a few years ago. So you want to do your container thing? Great. Very easy to build your own container and go. Well, gee, how do you run it? I'm glad you asked. Be careful, though. The command looks very simple, and it's almost just as simple. Say you don't want to build your own container, and you trust strangers on the internet for the foundational components of everything you're about to do. Plenty of options to choose from. Now, even though it's popular, easy, and there are plenty of resources out there, not too many organizations are running containers in production, which at this point might be a little mind-blowing. So DevOps with a single container is fun, happy-go-lucky, you feel real good, it's not too hard, not bad. What happens when your application is more complicated than just a WordPress blog? Okay, not too bad. We can wrap this in a bash script, right? Yeah, sure, go ahead and knock yourself out. But you'll find that gets to be a little cumbersome, especially running them in secure contexts. So when you're building scalable applications and microservices that comprise of multiple containers, you run into problems. Running this stuff together takes a little bit of work. So I lied. Containers aren't the end-all be-all solution in key to DevOps. We actually need a little bit more. How do we run these containers at scale? How do we get insight into what's going on? Health, security, volume management, so on. This is one of my favorite parts. Kubernetes. I'm sure you've all heard about it. Only the most popular project out there. So what's this Kubernetes thing? It's an open source project originated at Google. It is used to orchestrate and operate containers at scale. Okay. That sounds just like the cure for what ails us. The idea behind Kubernetes is that it will take your container workloads that have been declaratively described and run them amongst a cluster of resources. It can help do some basic connecting of containers with an internal DNS service, and it's all based on a REST API, so that makes interacting with it very easy. Naturally fits into a DevOps lifecycle. Your developer submits code, CI/CD engine pushes out a container, Kubernetes runs your containers on your hardware. Sweet. All right, well, before we call it a day, we need some internal networking for nodes and container pods to address each other. Okay, no problem. I've done networking before. That's not too bad. We'll just drop in Open vSwitch, right? All right, well, we need somewhere to store the images we built or proxy them so we're not pulling from external resources over to WAN every time, right? For every container, on every node. Okay, that shouldn't be too hard to integrate. Okay, so don't forget we need to do the DevOpsy thing and get some feedback and metrics into what's going on. How are we to know the container hasn't entered a crash loop state? And then what happens if it does enter a crash loop state? How do you manage that life cycle and a life cycle of scaling and rolling deployments? And now at this point, we're building integrations. So we need our own application services to glue all this together. So yay, we're building systems to run systems. And since we're doing that, this is all going to be a user-friendly platform with a nice web UI and documented APIs, right? Meh, yeah. And they said Kubernetes was going to be fun. They said it was going to be easy. They said it was going to change my life. I'm sure pretty much Kubernetes has given me more gray hair than anything else in my recent years. So as you start to operate Kubernetes clusters, you find you have to add a lot of extra components to make it usable and to fluidly deploy your workloads. What if there was a batteries included approach? What if someone out there made a certified and supported Kubernetes offering with everything you needed? Well, thankfully there is, and that's why we hit into Red Hat's OpenShift container platform. My favorite container platform, when I'm not masochistically operating vanilla Kubernetes clusters. The idea behind OpenShift is that they take the upstream Kubernetes project, apply security context integrations such as the registry, networking, routing, cloud integrations, so on, all wrapped in a supported enterprise lifecycle in a tight and neat little subscription. Quick comparison of some of the things that OpenShift brings along to the Kubernetes platform, a quick hits of a set of key values that it adds to help you get up and running very quickly. We've got a customer who has a goal to hit by 2020, next year-ish, of 80% of their non-critical systems deployed in the cloud as containers. To be honest, at first we kind of laughed because it's kind of an audacious goal in and of itself for any organization, but with OpenShift, we've actually made pretty great work towards that goal, and it's actually now an attainable target because of how easy, secure, and scalable OpenShift makes Kubernetes not just for your developers, but also for your operators. The whole DevOps thing, right? Shoot. So now we're done. We've got all we need to do DevOps, right? Yes and no. Let's take a minute and think about what we're about to do before we jump into this rocket ship. So something to think about DevOps when not applied with a security context. You've given your developers Ferraris on the Autobahn with little, if any, training or other sort of protection to keep them from going too fast, keep them from going off the guardrails and crashing. So let's jump into this secure software factory here. Starting down under the foundation, we've got Ansible deploying and configuring our infrastructure and core systems. So we've got automation there, check. Not only that, but thanks to our partner MindPoint Group and their enterprise lockdown offering, we have delicious automated Stig magic. Our infrastructure can be anywhere. Our demo later is keeping things cloud native, and we're playing with the 800-pound gorilla in the room by running on AWS. OpenShift is what powers our container platform, but up until this point, everything else doesn't really matter. This is a platform of broken dreams so far. What you need is centralized and managed repositories for artifacts, code, and containers, and the right pipeline that can scale and carry your application through static code testing, software composition analysis, container security, context reporting, and dynamic application testing while in operation. Just to name a few key considerations. Okay? Just a few of them. So we figured out DevOps, and we just work with security when the time is right, keep throwing things over the wall. Sure. If you want all your efforts so far to be in vain. So we're not thinking of security in DevOps as a here and there thing. Has to be along for the ride every step of the way, which isn't as bad as it sounds. So say you do this DevOps thing. Your life cycle might look like this: planning, development, testing, and review, deployment, more review, and hopefully a handoff. Your security gate is usually close to the end. What if instead of it being a judgmental toll booth, we eat this security elephant one bite at a time? So how do you break security into your day-to-day? Just dump them into the same Slack channel as the DevOps folk, right? Sure, but let's take the notion of moving these security stages that have been later on and shifting them left. So we start shifting these security steps left, documenting all along the way. Starting at the inception of the program or system, you're determining viability and threat parameters. As we're compiling the program and system documentation with the targeted security context in mind already, we can start to define the constraints of our environments and required security scopes. And this can vary widely, not just between programs and systems, but environments, operational regions, and more. These security specs are guidelines and best practices defined for particular industries and organizations. And I mentioned them earlier. MindPoint Group is how more and more of our customers get these NIST specs and DSOPs not only set up and deployed, but managed and documented. Very nice features they've got. Again, a key part of a secure software factory's automation and their enterprise lockdown can help you get to compliance requirements very quickly. Now, we have our baseline security infrastructure architecture documented and agreed upon. When operating containers, we benefit from the security inheritance model offered by these process isolation mechanisms. So by standardizing on a container platform, you've bettered your security posture. Excellent. So now we're pushing code, pulling in dependencies and software components. Do you really want to rely on Docker Hub, on the node registry? Got to consider software supply chains, or else you're going to end up having a bad time. So now we're reviewing changes. This is where GitOps comes in. Integration into your Git repositories to do automated review can save you considerable time, but this relies on a fluid feedback system and heuristics. As we're building new features and developing on capabilities, we're building tests for these new functions and their integrations, right? This is where code complexity can easily turn into heaps of technical debt if you're not building tests. And as we're deploying and doing additional review and testing, don't forget to integrate security tests and automate where you can. I'm sure your red team has a dozen scripts to test inputs for SQL injections, cross-site scripting, request forgery, and other weaponized payloads that can be introduced into your CI/CD pipeline with just a little bit of automation. At this point, we should have a mountain of documentation, but we're also at the finish line in much better shape than we normally would be. Now, the good program managers at this point would want to find a way to take their Splunk data that's reporting on the operation of the system and feed it back for continuous monitoring. Ooh. This will benefit not only the system, but the shared intelligence will be of aid to other pipelines and programs as well. So now we're closer to that DevSecOps pipeline where you can just deploy much faster because we've got the optics and inception, modification, origin, provenance, security, and more. Ah, that's beautiful. But wait. Let's touch on this step. Something in the middle that often gets overlooked. Where do software components come from? What's really in them? Are there vulnerabilities associated with the dozens of dependencies you're pulling in from public resources? There's an extremely popular Java cryptography library, Bouncy Castle. You might have heard of it. Might use it, in fact. Funny thing, there have been multiple versions of this library with CVE scores of 10 over the last decade and more. And vulnerable versions are still in use and being pulled to this day, maybe even in your organization. But of course, you don't do open source, and if you did, you'd know about it, right? So now we're getting into one of the key considerations components of our DevSecOps pipeline with Sonatype. If you've done anything with Java, you've benefited from Sonatype's work already. They've got millions of users around the globe. They can scale and have been the creators and operators of Maven Central, the largest Java repo in the world. So needless to say, these folk know a thing or two about scalable repositories, and they offer Nexus Repository Manager and have security researchers on staff to provide extra value to components and libraries that they manage and provide for the community. So think about this, a few questions for you. If I asked you to produce a list of all the components and dependencies an application or system uses, could you? Right now, even if I gave you time for it. What about all your applications and systems? Do you know where it comes from, and do you have any way to control and manage that? What are the embedded and assumed licenses applied by this stack of software? This lasagna. Can you apply policies to prevent non-approved components at scale and in an automated fashion as being delivered by these software factories that you're standing up? So to touch on the project suite offered by Sonatype, many of which we'll see in a few moments during the demo, the de facto starting point, Nexus Repository. Proxy, manage your incoming software repositories and store your generated artifacts all in one place. So you want to block repos, components, authors, set a policy on where, what, how. Nexus Firewall and Lifecycle give you that capability and the intelligence to create those policies and standard practices. Not only key in application modernization, but also for better communication with the security team, Nexus Auditor allows you to examine the composition of an application and will produce a bill of materials for your app. So this kind of helps with all the questions I asked earlier, huh? All right, we got an all-star team, the tech, the tools, the processes. Let's hit on a few issues our customers in the public sector face, right? So it took a while to get some entities on board with virtualization. You're going to need some additional investment, not only the platform and tools, but the documentation, enablement, training, and so on, because the tools we're using today that manage less contemporary systems do not translate to these new containers and microservices. Our public sector customers also have some special requirements, to say the least. Not just hardware and software peculiarities, but we also have to think on how and if some of these legacy systems can be migrated and modernized, and if and how do they fit into this DevSecOps context. Another problem we're facing is that these modern stacks are complicated, and they require new skills and different tools. Program managers are wary that these complex, predominantly open source stacks will be left to wither on the vine over time. But I'd argue that Kubernetes is here to stay. OpenShift is here to stay. In today's volatile and fast-paced competitive times, your bet is better with the enterprise-backed open source community than some of these boutique organizations. Program managers are also taking into consideration that new DevOps practices enable scalable agility, and that can either be orchestrated well to propel your mission or be the crippling blow to your Achilles. Now say you pull it off. You got everybody on Slack and Git, set up, manage CloudBees cores. How do you set compliance, manage policies to components being pulled in your scalable, automated, fancy schmancy pipeline? So speaking of danger, let's roll a live demo. Why not? These always go well and without any problems. First things first, we are, again, as I mentioned earlier, automated with Ansible, deployed on AWS and rolling OpenShift. Here we have a few namespaces and areas for us to work in. We're pulling in our code from a GitLab repository, so that's great. Easily integrated with the identity management projects we have set up. So as I start my day, I'm gonna, first thing, sign in the chat, right? You might have Slack. We're using, for this demonstration, a little open source alternative called Rocket Chat. And we can jump in and see, there have been a couple things already running. Outside of that, I'll want to jump into my workspace. Since we're doing the cloud native thing, my IDE is actually in a container, which is great. I can use anything from a beefy workstation if you need to a little Chromebook, sometimes even your phone. So I've got my work, we've got our code, we've got our chat. Of course, serious business going on here, deployment information and updates. As we take a look at our pipeline, we've got a couple key components. We've got the Nexus repository, IQ server for that enterprise integration, SonarCube, and then we've got CloudBees core and some of our managed team masters. These are just industry standard naming conventions. I don't make them. That's just how it is. So let's actually jump into here real quick. Now we could change up some code and trigger a build, but for brevity's sake, let's just go ahead and start this pipeline. So this pipeline is actually being triggered from OpenShift, but in a moment we'll see that it's actually being run in Jenkins. It's being run on one of our team masters, but we'll jump into our CloudBees core operator to actually see it from a higher level. It'll start in a few moments. We can see the Maven builder pod starting up now. And the pipeline kicking off. We've already got an easy bake version that's been deployed and set up for brevity's sake. But we can actually see that here. What we're going to be doing is building our application, testing it, a couple unit tests. There are some triggers if you want to fail it. Code analysis jumps into SonarCube. We're going to archive this artifact that we just created with Sonatype and do some analysis of that as well. Building the image in OpenShift and depositing it into this built-in image registry. Next, we're going to deploy into our dev environment. And of course, at this point, we would want to check it out before deploying to stage, right? So let's jump into dev. This sets up a deployment route and everything. If we want to see how you could kick this in the teeth, we can kill the instance, see the new pod. Oh, you might have just missed it. Come up. So it looks like it's an operational application. That's what we want. Changes look good. We're going to promote this in a stage. Now, if we jump back in the chat, you'll see a couple of things just pinged us. When we first started the pipeline, we got a message to say it was run, and now that it's actually been successfully built, we can actually check it out. Some information from CloudBees. If we jump back into our build pipeline, we can actually see all the stages have complete. Yay! It worked. Wonderful. And of course we promoted a stage, so we have our close to production environment here too. So let's go ahead and kill this instance and see this pod come back up. One of the magical parts of Kubernetes. The daemon failed, we killed it manually, and it recreated the container. Beautiful. Alrighty. So a few key components of our demo you saw earlier, but this isn't everything to using your DevSecOps pipeline. You're probably going to be a couple other components that you're going to need. We didn't touch on application monitoring, which again is a key portion, something a little bit larger than the scope of this presentation. So you'd be looking at something like Dynatrace for that. You'd want to aggregate your monitoring and security postures across your container hosts. So in most places we're using Sysdig. And then as you're running these applications, as you're deploying these new microservices, these new workflows, you'll actually want to strategize around cyber threat hunting, which is using data applications in order to actually see if you have been infiltrated by active persistent threats. So what's this all mean for you? Why should you go through all this sort of workflow? What's in it for me or you or your organization, mission, program, so on and so forth? DevOps as a base has been slowly moving in the public sector. DevSecOps practices and embedded security considerations, however, are making big strides, in some places across entire agencies at large, offered as a service. This means that you've got the documentation processes, workflow down, and with the right enablement, you can have new developers and operators sit down and work with production-level systems in a few hours. And as you get to this, we're not dreading this ATO process. It's something we operationalize and a step closer to that ATO, or contracts as a service idea, everyone's starting to formulate. I think probably the most important point is that it keeps us ahead of the competition. We can see the effects of DevSecOps practices by other large organizations and nation states abroad. This technological agility has been the make or break differentiator between commercial entities, and it's soon a time where we'll see the same effects on governments at large. Alright, now you've got a sneak peek into a secure software factory, or the templates and blueprints of. What should you do next? How do you go about building and implementing one of your own? If you're more technical and want to get started real quick, kick the tires, feel free to explore our GitHub repository. We live and breathe open source, so of course you'll find that there are sources for our workshops, trainings, and some new Ansible playbooks to easily and quickly aid in deployment of most of this pipeline, partner software, examples, and so on. If you're needing trial subscriptions, let us know. We'll be more than happy to get that coordinated for you. If your mission is a sooner than later objective date and need a way to quickly get up to speed in a turnkey offering, we do offer a DevSecOps starter pack with many of the primary components, support, and services required to hit the ground running, and the expertise of us and our partners to guide you along the way. We'll keep you nice and right. So before we close, we'd like to open it up for any audience member questions, comments, concerns, qualms, queries, conundrums, even threats. We'll field it all. Alrighty, and as we close, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and spending time with us today. And also, especially like to thank Ben from CloudBees for joining me today. The Ben and Ken show literally could not be possible without him. So if you're interested...
Can you hear me, Ken?
Yeah. Howdy.
Yeah. Everything you say is nonsense. Everyone who knows that you did the lion's share of this, and you're a smart guy and presented all the interesting content and tremendous partner. Not just CloudBees, but I know all the other stuff that you're doing. So my hat's off to you, and big gratitude to everybody.
Thank you, sir. You're a gentleman and a scholar. So we will be sending a recording and some additional follow-up information after the webinar. You'll receive these slides as well. If you do not receive this, please let us know. We do need your email. So if you got the link from a friend, reach out to us at one of our contact bits there, and we'll make sure to get you all the resources. Alrighty, so we do have a few questions come in, and I'll try to field a couple of them. We've only got a moment left in this presentation. Where should we start to move from ops to DevSecOps? That is an excellent question. It really depends on your workload trajectory. If you've got the same objective and time span to modernize around containers, you will want to modernize your operation tool set around container platforms. If you're just looking to secure and embed into a pipeline, then there are some other considerations to make. we'll follow up with you after this and kind of give you a little additional details and make sure we kind of button that up. Another question we got, quick thoughts on-prem versus cloud for DoD projects. Well, at this point, you can actually ideally start to experiment with hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, so you can actually burst to the cloud whenever your on-premise resources, your deployed resources don't have the availability. That burst ability is very key, and what's great about Kubernetes and OpenShift is that you've got it here, you've got it there, these deployed and descriptive files that produce these objects on this infrastructure and platform can be easily mutated and distributed elsewhere, right? It can run anywhere. So it's a good idea to think hybrid and multi-cloud at this stage. We'll give you some additional input as well, and we'll follow up with you to kind of provide you a little additional insight. If there were any other questions that we didn't really get to, didn't really have a moment to follow up with, we'll dig in deeper offline. We'll make sure to contact you. But otherwise, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this presentation, and we hope to see you next time.